I'm about to tell you about a woman who spent years holding a family together with her bare hands, until the morning she finally let go and discovered she'd been the only one holding on. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments, what's the hardest thing about loving someone who only loves you back when it's convenient for them? My mother-in-law's name was Constance. She was the kind of woman who filled every room she walked into, not with warmth, but with presence. The kind you feel before you see it. She had opinions about everything. How I folded laundry, how I seasoned food, how I spoke to her son, how I breathed what she considered her air inside what she considered her house. My husband Dennis had grown up in that house on Birchwood Crescent in Oakville. A wide 2-story with a wraparound porch, and a maple tree in the front yard that turned orange every October. His father had died when he was 19. After that, Constance ran the household alone, and she never let anyone forget it. When Dennis and I got married 6 years ago, moving in was supposed to be temporary, just until we saved enough for a down payment. In the Greater Toronto area, that wasn't a small thing. The market was brutal. We were both working, me as a registered practical nurse, him as a project coordinator, and even with 2 incomes, saving felt like trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. Constance offered the basement suite. She said it was the right thing to do. I believed her. That was my first mistake. Not trusting her exactly, but trusting the version of her I wanted to exist. The first year was manageable. We had a separate entrance, our own kitchen downstairs, a bathroom that was ours. There were boundaries, or at least the outline of them. Then her hip surgery happened in year 2, and everything shifted. She needed help with groceries, with appointments, with the endless phone calls to Service Ontario, and her insurance provider, and her prescription delivery, that always seemed to arrive at the wrong time. Dennis helped when he could, but he traveled for work 2 weeks out of every month, which meant most of it fell to me. I didn't mind at first. I'm a nurse. Caring for people is something I understand in my bones. But there's a difference between caring for a patient and caring for someone who has decided, quietly and without announcement, that you are their employee. She never said thank you. Not once. Not for the rides to her rheumatologist. Not for the meals I left in her fridge. Not for the nights I sat with her after her second surgery when she was scared and didn't want to admit it. She accepted all of it as though it were simply owed to her. Dennis noticed, but not enough. He'd say things like, "She doesn't mean it the way it sounds, and she had a hard life, you have to understand that." I understood. I did. But understanding someone's history doesn't mean absorbing their damage indefinitely. The tension had been building for 3 years by the time everything finally came apart. It started on a Thursday in February. I came home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital. One of those shifts where everything that could go wrong did. And I found Constance sitting at the kitchen table upstairs. Not the downstairs kitchen, mine. She'd come in through the interior door I had asked her, twice, to knock before using. She had a folder open in front of her. Legal-sized papers fanned out across the table. "Sit down," she said. Not a question. I set my bag on the counter. "I just got home." "I know when you got home." "Sit down, Meredith." I sat. She pushed the folder across the table toward me. "I've had a lawyer look at the situation," she said. "Given that you and Dennis have been living here rent-free for 6 years, and given that Dennis is listed on the title of this property as a joint tenant, I need to clarify a few things before I make any decisions about the house." I looked at the papers but didn't reach for them. "My plan," she continued, "is to sell. The market is good right now. I've spoken to a realtor. With Dennis's agreement, I can list within 60 days. You want to sell the house. It's too large for me alone. It's too expensive to maintain, and frankly, it's time." I kept my voice steady. "What does Dennis say?" "Dennis agrees with me." That landed differently than I expected. I sat with it for a moment. "And where does that leave us?" "You'll have time to find something suitable. I'm not unreasonable. 60 days. In the Ontario real estate market, 60 days to find a rental, because we certainly couldn't buy on the timeline she was describing. Felt like being told you had 60 days to find a new ocean. "I'll need to talk to Dennis," I said. "Of course." She gathered the papers back into the folder. "But I want you to understand, Meredith, this isn't negotiable. The house goes on the market in the spring." She left. I sat at the table until the kitchen went dark around me. I called Dennis that night. He was in Calgary, somewhere between a work dinner and his hotel. "She told me," I said. "I was going to tell you this weekend." He sounded tired, defensive. "You agreed to it. It's her house." "It has your name on the deed, Dennis." Silence. "I looked it up," I said. "After she showed me the papers tonight, I looked it up. You're listed as a joint tenant with right of survivorship. That's not nothing." More silence. Then, "She's my mother, Meredith. I know she is." She needs to simplify her life. I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was she's been simplifying her life on my back for 3 years and now she's simplifying us right out of it. Instead I said, okay, we'll talk this weekend. I hung up and sat in the quiet of the basement suite for a long time. The hum of the furnace, the creak of the floorboards above where Constance moved from room to room. What I didn't tell Dennis was that I had already spoken to a lawyer. Not that night, that came afterward, but 2 months before that Thursday conversation, I had gone to a legal clinic downtown on my day off. I'd been carrying a feeling I couldn't name for a long time, a low-level unease that things were more fragile than they looked. I'd brought copies of documents I'd found in our filing cabinet, the original purchase agreement, the deed, some correspondence from when Dennis's father had first bought the property decades ago. The lawyer I spoke with was a quiet woman with reading glasses perched on her nose and a habit of letting silence do the work. She reviewed everything carefully. Then she looked up. Your husband holds a legitimate joint tenancy interest in this property, she told me. That interest cannot be severed unilaterally. Any sale requires his consent and, depending on certain agreements, may require consideration of your position as a married spouse under the Family Law Act. I listened carefully, she continued. In Ontario, a matrimonial home carries specific protections. Even if only one spouse is on title, the other spouse has rights that cannot simply be waived without proper legal process. In your case, your husband is on title, which makes this more straightforward. But I want you to understand that Constance cannot force a sale without Dennis's cooperation. I left her office with a very specific kind of calm, the kind that comes not from the absence of fear, but from finally understanding the shape of the problem. I kept that knowledge to myself, not to use it as a weapon, but because I knew that when the moment came, I would need it. The weekend Dennis came home. We sat in the basement suite with the door closed and the heat turned up against the February cold. He looked exhausted. He always looked exhausted after Calgary. Something about the dry air and the altitude and the particular kind of work stress that followed him home. I didn't bring up the lawyer. I just asked him what he actually wanted. He rubbed the back of his neck. "It'll be okay. That's not an answer, I know. Do you want to sell?" "Not for her, for you." He was quiet for a long time. "I grew up in this house," he finally said. "I don't know how to want to sell it." That told me everything. The next few weeks moved slowly. Constance began meeting with realtors. I heard them sometimes upstairs walking through rooms, talking about staging and comparable listings, and what updated kitchens were doing for property values in Halton region. She never mentioned any of it to me. I was furniture. I focused on work. I picked up extra shifts. I started setting aside more of my paycheck into an account Constance didn't know about, not out of paranoia, but out of the same quiet practicality that had gotten me through hard things before. I was raised by a mother who believed in keeping your own counsel and your own savings, and she had not raised me wrong. Dennis started coming home more. I think the guilt was getting to him, even if he couldn't name it. Then came the night that changed everything. It was the last Friday in March. I'd worked a day shift and come home to the smell of dinner cooking upstairs. Constance sometimes left the interior door open when she cooked, and the smell filtered down. I changed out of my scrubs and was about to start my own meal when I heard voices. Constance had someone over, a man I didn't recognize, talking about square footage and closing timelines. She'd had a realtor through without telling us. Without telling Dennis. I climbed the stairs and knocked on the interior door. She opened it with a look that told me I was interrupting. "There's someone walking through the house," I said. "Yes, Patrick recommended him. He's very good. This is also Dennis's home." She tilted her head very slightly, the way she did when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Dennis knows. He didn't mention it to me. That's between you and Dennis, isn't it?" Not a question. The man, the realtor, glanced between us with the practiced discomfort of someone who had walked into family dynamics before and knew to say nothing. I looked at Constance for a moment. "I'll need to be included in any conversations about this property going forward." She smiled, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Of course, Meredith." I went back downstairs. I called Dennis immediately. He picked up on the second ring. "She had a realtor through the house," I said. A pause. "I know. She told me this morning. I was going to mention it tonight, Dennis." I stopped, breathed. "You need to decide what you actually want, because right now you're deciding by not deciding, and that still counts as a decision." He was quiet for a long time. "I need you to come home," I said. "Not this weekend. Tomorrow." He came home the next afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table in the basement suite, the same table where I'd been sitting when Constance had first laid out her plans 2 months before. Dennis had his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. He looked like a man trying to hold two things at once that were pulling in opposite directions. "She's going to be hurt if we fight this," he said. "She's already decided we don't count," I said. "The only question is whether you agree with her." He flinched. I hadn't meant it to land that hard, but I didn't take it back. "I spoke to a lawyer," I said quietly. "A couple months ago." He looked up. I laid it out for him. The joint tenancy, the matrimonial home protections under the Family Law Act, the fact that Constance could not force a sale without his consent. The fact that his consent, given our marriage and the length of our residence, was not a small thing. He sat with all of it for a long time. "She doesn't know you know any of this," he said finally. "No. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I wasn't sure yet what I wanted to do with it. And because I needed to know if you were going to stand next to me or behind her. I couldn't know that until now. He was quiet again. Then he said something I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry, Meredith. I've been making this easier for her and harder for you, and I told myself it was just the path of least resistance. But that's not good enough." I didn't say anything. I let it sit there between us. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to have an honest conversation with her," I said. "With both of us in the room. And I want her to understand that this isn't something she gets to decide alone." The conversation happened 2 days later, on a Sunday afternoon. Constance had made tea, which felt almost performatively civilized. She sat across from us at her kitchen table, the upstairs one, the good one, with the window that looked out over the backyard. And she looked faintly surprised that Dennis was sitting on my side of it. Dennis spoke first. He told her he loved her. He told her he understood why she wanted to simplify. He told her he was sorry he hadn't been clearer sooner. Then he said, "But I can't agree to a sale right now. And I should have said that from the beginning instead of letting you think I was on board." Constance's expression shifted. Just slightly. "You agreed." "I didn't disagree," he said. "That's not the same thing." She looked at me. I held her gaze. "Meredith," she said, and her voice had dropped into a register I recognized. The one that meant she was preparing to say something she'd been sharpening for a while. "You have never belonged in this house. I allowed you here as a courtesy for my son's sake, and you have spent 6 years acting as though you're owed something. You are a guest, and this is my home." The room went quiet. I had expected something like this. I had run through versions of it in my head for weeks. But hearing it out loud, in the kitchen where I'd sat for 6 years, was different from imagining it. I didn't raise my voice. "You're right that this is your home," I said, "and I have respected that. Every appointment I drove you to. Every meal I left upstairs when you weren't feeling well. Every time I sat with you after your surgery because you asked me not to call the night nurse and I said yes. That wasn't a guest being courteous. That was me choosing, over and over, to show up for someone who had decided I didn't belong." She opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," I said gently but clearly. "I'm not asking you to apologize for how you feel about me. But I am telling you that Dennis and I are not leaving on your timeline, and we are not agreeing to a sale under pressure. If and when this house gets sold, it will be a decision we all make together." That's not a threat. That's just what's true. Constance stood up from the table. She walked to the window and stood with her back to us. After a long moment, she said, "I'd like you both to leave." "This is Dennis's home," I said quietly. "He's not going anywhere." She didn't respond. We left her in the kitchen and went back downstairs. What followed was the strangest 2 weeks of my life. Constance went very quiet. Not the stiff, performative quiet of someone making a point. Something more uncertain than that. She stopped leaving the interior door open when she cooked. She stopped appearing at the top of the stairs when she heard us come in. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Dennis told me she'd called his aunt in Hamilton, who had called him the next morning to say that Constance was very upset. I told him I was sorry she was hurting, and I meant it. But I wasn't sorry for what I'd said. I kept going to work. I kept putting money aside. I went back to the lawyer once more, just to understand all the options, not because I wanted to fight, but because I needed to know the whole map before I decided which road to take. Then something happened that I hadn't prepared for. 3 weeks after that Sunday conversation, I came home from a night shift to find an envelope on the kitchen table downstairs. My name on the front, in Constance's handwriting. I set down my bag and stood there looking at it for a moment before I opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper, and underneath it, a smaller envelope with something tucked inside. The paper was a letter, short, 4 paragraphs. She wrote that she had spent the past 3 weeks thinking. She wrote that she had spoken to her own lawyer and had been told things she had not known. About Dennis's legal position, about the matrimonial home designation, about what a sale would and wouldn't look like without full cooperation. She wrote that she had also spoken, privately to her sister, who had apparently told her some things she had needed to hear for a long time. Then she wrote something I hadn't expected. She wrote that she had treated me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be known, and that she understood, even if she couldn't fully explain it, that this had been wrong. She didn't apologize exactly. It wasn't that kind of letter, but it was as close as Constance had probably ever come. The smaller envelope held a key, a spare key to the upstairs with a piece of masking tape on it that said in her neat block printing, "Front door." In case. I sat down on the edge of the couch and held the key in my palm for a long time. I didn't rush upstairs. I didn't go knock on her door. I let the morning be quiet. Later that afternoon, when I knew she was home, I went upstairs and made tea. I set 2 cups on the table. I called out to let her know there was one for her. She came into the kitchen in her housecoat and reading glasses, and she sat across from me. And neither of us said anything for a while. "The maple's getting leggy," I finally said, looking out the window at the front yard. "It needs trimming before summer." She looked out too. "I know. I keep meaning to call someone. Dennis can do the lower branches. I'll call an arborist for the top." She nodded, picked up her cup. We didn't talk about the letter. We didn't talk about the Sunday conversation, or the realtor, or the 6 years of small accumulated silences. Some things don't need to be unpacked all at once. Some things just need someone to stay at the table. I stayed. That was 8 months ago. The house on Birchwood Crescent has not been listed for sale. Constance still makes her opinions known, in the particular way she always has: too much salt in the soup, the recycling bin in the wrong spot, her son works too hard and I should make sure he rests. I've stopped expecting her to change. But something else has changed, quieter and harder to name. She knocks now before she opens the interior door. She thanked me, last month, after I drove her to a specialist in Mississauga in the middle of a snowstorm. She actually said the words. I didn't make a thing of it. I just said, of course. Dennis and I are still saving for a down payment. The market hasn't gotten any kinder, but we're saving with a plan now, not out of desperation. There's a difference. What I know after all of it is this: I didn't fight for the house. I never wanted the house. What I fought for was the right to not be erased from my own life, the right to stand in a room and be counted. You can love someone's family without disappearing into them. You can be patient without being invisible. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do, in the middle of someone else's certainty, is simply refuse to leave. Not with noise. Not with a lawyer's letter pushed across a table, just by staying, quietly, entirely yourself. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever had to fight to be seen by someone who was supposed to see you? Share this with someone who needs to hear that holding your ground doesn't always look like war. Sometimes it just looks like making 2 cups of tea and sitting down.